The question that broke me. Have you ever wanted to quit everything, not just English, but your marriage, your dream? Even the version of yourself you once believed in, because you were simply too tired to translate your heart into a language that didn't feel like home? That question sat with me one winter night in America. It didn't shout. It didn't accuse. It just lingered. And maybe, if you are here watching this video, trying to practice real English story practice, trying to improve your listening, reading, and speaking skills slowly, maybe you know that feeling too. The quiet exhaustion. The voice in your head saying, maybe I am not good enough. Let me speak slowly. Let me tell you my story. When I first came to the United States, I thought English was only about vocabulary and grammar. I believed if I memorized enough words, I would survive. I believed if I practiced pronunciation every day, confidence would magically appear. But language is not just words. Language is identity. Language is courage. Language is connection. And when you cannot express your heart clearly, you start to feel smaller. In psychology, there is something called language anxiety. Researchers have found that when we speak a second language, the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, becomes more active. Your body reacts as if you are in danger. Your heart beats faster. Your palms sweat. Your voice shakes. It is not weakness. It is biology. So if you feel nervous when speaking English, your nervous system is not broken. It is trying to protect you. I remember standing in a grocery store in the Midwest during my first winter. Snow outside. Fluorescent lights inside. A cashier asked me a simple question, paper or plastic? I froze. Paper? Plastic? I knew these words. I had studied them. But in that moment, my brain felt empty. I smiled awkwardly. I whispered, sorry. She repeated it. Slower. I still felt embarrassed. Behind me, the line grew longer. My face felt hot. Finally, I said, plastic. Thank you. 2 words. Plastic. Thank you. But I walked to my car feeling like I had failed a big exam. Have you ever had a moment like that? A small situation that felt huge? That is how pain begins quietly. Not with drama. With tiny cracks in confidence. At home, I would replay conversations again and again. Why didn't I say this? Why didn't I answer better? My mind turned into a critic. And when you practice English with self-criticism instead of curiosity, learning becomes heavy. There is research in neuroscience that shows repetition with positive emotion strengthens neural pathways faster than repetition with shame. In simple words, if you practice English while feeling encouraged, your brain learns better. If you practice while feeling embarrassed, your brain resists. But I did not know that then. I thought discipline was the answer. So I forced myself. 1 hour listening. 1 hour reading. 1 hour speaking alone in the mirror. Hello, my name is, today I will, I think that. The sentences were correct. My heart was not. And here is something I want to tell you clearly, slowly, so you can hear it and maybe repeat it aloud with me. Fluency is not only about speaking fast. It is about feeling safe. Say it again. Slowly. Fluency is not only about speaking fast. It is about feeling safe. In my early months in America, I did not feel safe. The climate was different. The culture was different. Even humor was different. People smiled at strangers. People talked about the weather like it was a hobby. Cold today, huh? Looks like snow again. Small talk everywhere. In my country, conversations felt deeper, more direct. In the U.S., I had to learn that "how are you?" does not always mean they want your life story. Sometimes it just means, "I acknowledge you." These cultural differences may seem small, but when you are already tired from translating every sentence in your head, they feel overwhelming. And at night, when the house was quiet, I would ask myself a painful question. Did I come here to grow, or to slowly disappear? That question broke me. But it also woke me up. Because pain, if you sit with it long enough, starts to teach you. I began to notice something. Every time I told myself, "I am bad at English," my shoulders tightened. My breathing became shallow. My brain shut down. But when I told myself, "I am learning," slowly, my body relaxed just a little. Small shift. Big difference. So I changed one habit. Instead of saying, "I can't speak English well," I started saying, "I am practicing English every day." Feel the difference? Can't closes the door. Practicing keeps it open. That was the first seed of healing. And maybe you are here, practicing your listening right now. Maybe you are repeating my sentences quietly. Maybe you are thinking, "This sounds like me." If so, I want you to know something important. Your struggle with English is not a sign that you are incapable. It is a sign that you are stretching beyond your comfort zone. And stretching is uncomfortable. Muscles shake before they grow stronger. The brain does the same. That winter night, sitting by the window, watching snow fall under a streetlight, I did not know my pain would become power. I only knew I was tired of being afraid of simple conversations. So I made a quiet promise to myself. I will not quit. I will speak, even if my voice shakes. I will learn through my own story. And that promise, small and fragile, was the beginning of everything. First winter in America. Have you ever noticed how weather can change your mood before you even realize it? One cloudy day, and suddenly your motivation disappears like your Wi-Fi signal during a storm. Now imagine moving to a place where winter feels endless, where the sky is gray for weeks, and where the cold air bites your face every time you step outside. That was my first winter in America. I arrived in the Midwest in late November. People warned me. Winter here is serious. I smiled politely. I thought, cold is cold. I was wrong. In my home country, winter was gentle. Cool air. Light jacket. Maybe some rain. But in America, Winter had personality. It was loud. It was white. It covered everything in snow and silence. The first time I saw snow falling heavily, I whispered, "It's beautiful." 2 weeks later, I whispered, "It's too much." The climate difference was not just physical. It was emotional. Research shows that reduced sunlight can lower serotonin levels, affecting mood. There is even a term, seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. When I read about it later, I almost laughed. I thought I was weak. But my brain chemistry was also adjusting. And when your mood drops, your motivation to practice English drops too. You wake up. It's dark. You come home. It's dark again. Your brain says, "Let's stay warm. Let's not speak. Let's not try." But life in America did not slow down because I felt cold. I had to drive in snow for the first time. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I repeated simple English phrases in my head, "Slow down. Be careful. You can do this." Sometimes I think language learning is like driving in snow. You move slowly. You overthink every turn. You are afraid of sliding. But the more you practice, the more your body remembers what to do. One morning, I slipped on ice outside our apartment. A neighbor rushed over and asked, "Are you okay?" I wanted to explain that I was embarrassed, that I was new here, that I didn't know how to walk on ice. Instead, I said, "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you." Simple sentence. Present tense. Clear pronunciation. That day, I realized something important. In real life, we don't need perfect English. We need functional English. Say that slowly with me. I need functional English. Not perfect. Not poetic. Functional. Winter also changed how I saw American culture. People here prepared seriously. Salt on sidewalks. Snow tires. Weather alerts on phones. Schools closing because of snowstorms. It was organized. Structured. Practical. In my country, weather was something we accepted. In America, weather was something people planned for. That difference taught me something about language too. If you prepare small phrases in advance, communication becomes easier. Just like people prepare for winter, you can prepare for conversations. For example, I started writing 3 simple sentences every morning. Today is cold but beautiful. I will practice English for 20 minutes. I am learning step by step. Short. Clear. Repeatable. Neuroscience tells us repetition builds neural pathways. But repetition alone is boring. So I connected repetition with daily life. When I saw snow, I described it in English. When I drank hot coffee, I described the taste. The coffee is strong. The air feels sharp. My hands are freezing. Language became observation. Instead of fighting winter, I used winter as content. There is a powerful learning principle called contextual learning. The brain remembers information better when it is connected to real experience. When I said, "It's freezing," while actually feeling cold wind on my face, my brain stored that phrase deeper. So maybe the problem was not that English was hard. Maybe I was learning it in a disconnected way before. Winter also affected my marriage. When you stay indoors for long periods, small differences become bigger. My husband adapted quickly to American life. He joked with coworkers. He understood local slang. I felt slower, quieter. Comparison is dangerous for language learners. Psychologists call it social comparison theory. When we compare ourselves to someone more fluent, our confidence drops. And confidence affects performance. It becomes a cycle. One night, after another silent dinner, I said softly, "Sometimes I feel stupid when I speak English." He looked surprised. "You're not stupid. You're learning." Learning. That word again. Why do we accept that children need years to learn a language, but expect ourselves to feel fluent in months? Why do we give children patience, but give ourselves pressure? Winter outside. Winter inside. But something shifted in me during those cold months. I stopped trying to sound impressive. I focused on sounding clear. I practiced speaking slowly. I recorded my voice. I listened back without judging. Instead of saying, "This sounds terrible," I asked, "Is it understandable?" Understandable is powerful. One afternoon, I walked outside after a snowfall. The world was quiet. Snow-covered cars, trees, roofs. I whispered in English, "Everything looks peaceful." And for the first time, I believed it. Maybe the climate did not come to break me. Maybe it came to slow me down. To force me to speak more gently. To listen more carefully. Winter stripped away noise. It left space. And in that space, my English and my heart began to breathe. When English felt impossible. Picture this instead. You open your mouth to speak, and your brain suddenly goes blank, not empty like peace, but empty like someone deleted your files without warning. That was me in the early months of living in the United States. Not dramatic. Just painfully real. English did not just feel difficult. It felt impossible. At home, I was articulate. I could explain emotions, argue gently, tell stories with humor. In English, I became simple. Basic. Reduced. My vocabulary shrank. My personality felt smaller. And when your language shrinks, your confidence often shrinks with it. There is a psychological concept called ego depletion. When your brain works extra hard to process language, translating, checking grammar, searching for words, it uses more cognitive energy. By the end of the day, you are not just tired. You are mentally drained. That exhaustion can look like laziness, but it is actually overload. That explained why after small conversations at the bank or school office, I wanted to go home and say nothing for hours. Silence became my hiding place. But silence is dangerous in relationships. My husband would ask, "How was your day?" I would answer, "It was okay." 2 words. Safe words. Easy words. But not honest words. Inside, I was frustrated. I felt dependent. I hated asking him to make phone calls for me. I hated saying, "Can you explain this policy?" or "Can you talk to them?" Each request felt like proof that I was not strong enough. Immigration policies, healthcare forms, insurance documents, American systems are precise and paperwork heavy. One small misunderstanding can create big stress. And when you are reading complex English with emotional pressure, your brain enters survival mode. In survival mode, learning stops. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and language production, becomes less active when we feel threatened. So if you feel anxious speaking English, your brain literally has less access to vocabulary. That is not weakness. That is biology again. One afternoon, I had to call a customer service line about a billing mistake. I wrote a script before dialing. "Hello, I'm calling about my account. There is a mistake in the charge. Can you please explain this to me?" Simple sentences. Clear structure. When the automated voice started speaking quickly, my heart raced. I pressed the wrong number. I had to start again. I almost hung up. But I didn't. When the representative answered, I read my script slowly. My pronunciation was not perfect. I paused between phrases. The woman on the line said, "Take your time." 3 words. Gentle. Patient. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. It felt like an hour. When I hung up, nothing dramatic happened. No applause. No fireworks. Just a small, quiet realization, I survived. And that survival mattered. Language learning experts talk about comprehensible input, listening to English that is slightly above your current level. But there is another concept that changed everything for me: comprehensible output. Speaking at your level. Not above it. Not pretending. Instead of trying to sound advanced, I focused on sounding clear. I don't understand. Could you repeat that? Please speak slowly. These are powerful sentences. Practice them. Say them aloud now if you want. Your brain remembers what your mouth practices. The deeper struggle was not grammar. It was identity. In my first language, I was confident. In English, I felt like a child. And adults do not like feeling like children. But here is a perspective shift that helped me. Children are not ashamed of mistakes. They experiment. They repeat. They mispronounce words with pride. Why did I expect myself to skip that stage? One evening, after a misunderstanding at a parent meeting, I cried in the car. I said out loud, "Maybe I am not meant to live here." That sentence scared me. Because it was not about English anymore. It was about belonging. Belonging is deeply connected to language. When you understand jokes, cultural references, small talk, you feel included. When you don't, you feel outside the circle. But exclusion is often a temporary phase in adaptation. Sociologists describe cultural adjustment in stages: honeymoon, frustration, adaptation, integration. I was clearly in the frustration stage. Everything felt harder than expected. The climate, the culture, the communication. Yet frustration is not failure. It is transition. So I made a new rule for myself. Every day, I would speak English at least once outside my comfort zone. Not a big speech. Just one moment. Asking a question. Starting small talk. Ordering confidently. One day at a cafe, instead of pointing at the menu, I said, "I'd like a medium latte, please." Full sentence. Eye contact. Calm voice. The barista smiled. Sure thing. Nothing special. But inside, something grew. Confidence does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates through tiny proofs. Tiny evidence that you can function. And slowly, English stopped feeling impossible. It started feeling challenging. There is a difference. Impossible means I cannot. Challenging means I am learning. That shift changed my marriage too. Instead of hiding my struggles, I shared them. Instead of saying, "It's fine," I said, "Today was hard." I felt nervous speaking. Honest English may be simple, but it builds real connection. And that was the moment I understood something powerful. The problem was never that my English was too weak. The problem was that my fear was too loud. When I lowered the volume of fear, even slightly, my voice became clearer. Culture shock at the dinner table. The first time I attended an American family dinner, I prepared like it was a language exam. I reviewed polite phrases in my head. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me. The food is delicious. Simple. Safe. Rehearsed. What I did not prepare for was the speed. Everyone spoke quickly. People interrupted each other, not rudely, just energetically. Jokes flew across the table. Someone mentioned football. Someone else talked about politics. A child asked a question about school policies. Laughter. Opinions. Side conversations. I smiled. I nodded. I caught maybe 60%. And when you only understand 60%, your brain works at 120%. American dinner culture surprised me. In my country, meals were slower. Respect for elders shaped who spoke first. Silence was not awkward. In this house, silence felt like a gap that needed to be filled immediately. At one point, someone turned to me and asked, "So what do you think?" My heart jumped. What was the question? I replayed the last 30 seconds in my mind. Climate change? Local taxes? School lunches? I chose the safest strategy. I think it's complicated. Everyone laughed. They nodded. Yes, it is. It worked. But I knew I had guessed. Cultural communication styles differ in subtle ways. In the United States, expressing opinions is often encouraged. Even children are asked, "What do you think?" It builds independence. In other cultures, harmony may be valued more than direct opinion sharing. This difference affected my English learning deeply. When you are afraid of giving the wrong opinion, you speak less. When you speak less, you practice less. When you practice less, improvement slows. It becomes a quiet cycle. Psychologists call this avoidance behavior. You avoid situations that trigger anxiety. The short-term result is comfort. The long-term result is stagnation. So I started studying not only English words, but American conversation patterns. I noticed common small talk topics: weather, sports, weekend plans, traffic, food. I noticed phrases people use to soften opinions. I might be wrong, but, in my experience, it seems like these phrases are social bridges. They make conversation safer. 1 week later, at another dinner, someone mentioned the unpredictable weather. Instead of staying quiet, I said slowly, "In my country, winter is much warmer. Here, the snow is beautiful but intense." The sentence was not advanced. But it was personal. Real. Suddenly, people asked me questions. Where are you from? What's winter like there? The conversation slowed down. It included me. That night, I realized something important. Sharing differences creates connection. There is research in intercultural communication showing that when people exchange personal cultural stories, empathy increases. The brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Storytelling literally builds trust. So instead of trying to hide my accent, I used it as part of my story. I began practicing descriptive sentences about cultural contrasts. Families in my country often live close together. In the U.S., independence is valued early. Here, children are encouraged to speak up. Clear. Comparative. Honest. And something unexpected happened. The more I spoke about differences, the less ashamed I felt about not being fully American. At one dinner, my husband squeezed my hand under the table after I shared a story about my childhood. Later he said, "You sounded confident." That word again. Confidence does not mean fast speech. It means grounded speech. Dinner conversations also taught me about humor. American humor often includes sarcasm. At first, I took jokes literally. When someone said, "Oh great, more snow," with a dramatic tone, I thought they were happy. They were not. Understanding tone is part of listening practice. So I started watching short comedy clips with subtitles. I listened for intonation, rising pitch, exaggeration, pauses before punchlines. Linguists explain that prosody, the rhythm and tone of speech, carries emotional meaning. If you only study vocabulary, you miss half the message. So at the dinner table, I began paying attention not just to words, but to music. The music of English. There were still awkward moments. Once, I misused a phrase and said something slightly strange. A brief silence followed. My face warmed. But then someone gently corrected me. I repeated the correct version. We moved on. The world did not collapse. That is the secret most learners do not realize. Native speakers forget your mistake faster than you do. Over time, dinner stopped feeling like a test. It became practice. Real English story practice. Not from a textbook, but from mashed potatoes, political debates, and children arguing about dessert. And somewhere between awkward laughter and slow sentences, I began to feel less like a guest, and more like a participant. Culture shock did not disappear overnight. But it transformed. Instead of seeing difference as a barrier, I began to see it as material. Content. Story. And when your life becomes your classroom, every dinner becomes a lesson, and every lesson becomes a step toward belonging. Policies, paperwork, and panic. Nothing tests your English confidence like an official letter with bold words at the top. The envelope looked harmless. White. Ordinary. But inside was a notice about health insurance coverage and policy changes. Dense paragraphs. Formal vocabulary. Deadlines. Conditions. Exceptions. I read the first sentence 3 times. This notice is to inform you that your coverage may be subject to modification pending verification of eligibility. Subject to modification. Pending verification. Eligibility. Individually, I understood the words. Together, they felt like a puzzle designed to make immigrants nervous. American systems are structured and rule-based. Healthcare, taxes, school enrollment, driver's licenses, everything requires forms. Everything requires documentation. And everything requires understanding precise English. Back home, systems felt more flexible, more relationship-based. Here, policy is policy. It does not care about your accent. My chest tightened. What if I misunderstood something important? What if we lost coverage because I missed a deadline? Stress changes how the brain processes language. When cortisol, the stress hormone, increases, working memory decreases. That means complex reading becomes harder under pressure. So the more anxious I felt, the less clearly I could think. Panic is not productive for comprehension. Instead of forcing myself to understand the entire document at once, I changed strategy. I broke it into sections. 1 paragraph. Pause. Underline unknown words. Look them up. Write simple definitions. Subject to modification, can change. Pending, waiting for something. Eligibility, qualification. Then I rewrote the sentence in simple English. This letter says my insurance might change if they need more proof. Suddenly, it felt manageable. There is a learning principle called chunking. The brain remembers information better when it is grouped into meaningful parts. Long legal sentences overwhelm working memory. Short, rewritten sentences build clarity. So I created a habit. Whenever I faced complex English, I translated it into simpler English, not into my first language, but into easier English. That shift was powerful. Instead of running from official documents, I treated them as advanced reading practice connected to real life. High stakes. Real vocabulary. immediate relevance. Still, there were moments of frustration. At the Department of Motor Vehicles, I waited for 2 hours to renew a license. When my number was called, the employee asked for a document I did not bring. I misunderstood the requirement online. I tried to explain. I thought this was enough. She shook her head gently. You also need proof of residency. Proof of residency. Another phrase to learn. I walked back to the car fighting tears. It felt like failure again. But this time, something was different. Instead of blaming myself completely, I analyzed the situation. What did I misunderstand? Which words confused me? How can I prevent this next time? Learning from mistakes turns embarrassment into data. That evening, I searched online, DMV proof of residency examples. I read official websites slowly. I wrote down typical documents, utility bill, lease agreement, bank statement. The next week, I returned fully prepared. When the same employee saw me, she smiled slightly. You're back. Yes, I said calmly. I have the required documents. Required documents. Clear. Correct. Confident. This time, everything worked. The victory was small. A plastic card. A renewed license. But internally, it was bigger. I handled an American system in English without asking my husband to step in. Independence feels different when earned through effort. Policies also taught me cultural values. In the U.S., clarity and documentation protect both sides. It may feel strict, but it creates predictability. When you understand the rules, you can navigate them. Understanding reduces fear. I started applying the same structured mindset to my English learning. Instead of vague goals like improve my speaking, I created measurable steps. 10 minutes reading official news headlines. 5 new vocabulary words related to daily life. 1 phone call practice per week. Specific beats emotional. Research in behavioral psychology shows that specific, achievable goals increase motivation because they provide visible progress. The brain releases dopamine when tasks are completed. Even small ones. Paperwork stopped being an enemy. It became training. And slowly, panic turned into preparation. One afternoon, I helped a new immigrant friend understand a school enrollment form. She looked as overwhelmed as I once did. I explained each section in simple English. This part asks for emergency contact. This part asks about allergies. Sign here. As I spoke, I realized something quietly beautiful. The words that once scared me were now tools I could share. Pain had not disappeared. It had transformed. The same policies that once made me feel powerless had strengthened my reading skills, expanded my vocabulary, and forced me to communicate clearly. Language grows fastest when connected to necessity. And necessity had been my strict but effective teacher. Love under pressure. Cold weather tests your coat. Hard seasons test your marriage. By the time winter melted into a gray, uncertain spring, my English was improving slowly, but emotionally, I was exhausted. Cultural differences, paperwork stress, financial adjustments, and daily misunderstandings had created quiet tension between my husband and me. Nothing dramatic. Just small friction. When two people live between cultures, communication becomes more than language. It becomes interpretation. One evening, after a long day, he said casually, "You should try to be more confident when you speak." He meant encouragement. I heard criticism. That is the danger of learning a language while carrying emotional weight. You do not just translate words. You translate tone through insecurity. Psychologists call this cognitive distortion. When we feel vulnerable, we interpret neutral comments as negative. My brain was already tired from English processing, so emotional filters became stronger. Instead of reacting immediately, I paused. "I am trying," I said slowly. "But sometimes I feel scared." Scared. A simple word. Honest. Clear. That conversation changed something. We began having intentional English conversations at home. Not fast. Not perfect. Slow and intentional. We agreed on a rule: no interrupting, no correcting grammar during emotional talks. When your partner corrects your grammar during a serious discussion, connection disappears. So we separated two things: communication for relationship and communication for practice. For relationship, clarity mattered more than accuracy. For practice, correction was welcome. This small boundary reduced tension immediately. Love under pressure reveals differences in upbringing too. In my culture, emotional expression was subtle. In American culture, open communication is often encouraged. Use your words, parents tell children. Express feelings directly. That directness felt uncomfortable at first. But it also created opportunity. Instead of saying, "It's fine," I began saying, "I feel overwhelmed today." Instead of silence, I tried, "I need support with this call." These are not complex sentences. But they are powerful. There is research in relationship psychology showing that couples who use "I feel" statements reduce conflict escalation. When you say, "You always," defensiveness increases. When you say, "I feel," vulnerability opens space. So English became not just a survival tool, but a bridge. Financial stress also added pressure. Adjusting to American cost of living, rent, insurance, groceries required careful budgeting. Numbers in English. Contracts in English. Future planning in English. When stress rises, patience decreases. Small miscommunications feel larger. One night, we argued about a misunderstanding related to a bank notice. I misread the due date. He assumed I understood. The late fee was small, but the frustration felt big. Silence filled the room again. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of withdrawing, I said quietly, "I don't want English to be the reason we fight." That sentence shifted the energy. We both realized the problem was not each other. It was adjustment. Sociologists describe immigrant marriages as experiencing acculturative stress. Both partners adapt at different speeds. One may integrate faster linguistically. The other may struggle more emotionally. Without awareness, resentment grows. With awareness, empathy grows. So we created a weekly ritual. Sunday evenings. Tea. No phones. We talked slowly in English about one challenge and one success from the week. One challenge. One success. Sometimes my success was small. I made a phone call alone. Sometimes his challenge was emotional. Work felt isolating. Language practice mixed with emotional honesty. And something beautiful emerged. The more I spoke vulnerably in English, the less afraid I felt of making mistakes. Because when someone listens to your heart, they do not count your grammar errors. One afternoon, months later, I noticed something subtle. We were discussing future plans, career goals, maybe buying a house one day. I was speaking fluidly. Not perfectly, but fluidly. I was not translating every word in my head. I was thinking in English. That moment almost made me laugh. All those nights of self-doubt. All those frozen grocery store interactions. All those paperwork tears. And here I was, discussing mortgage rates calmly. Love under pressure did not break us. It forced growth. It forced clearer communication. It forced vulnerability. It forced patience. And patience, repeated over time, becomes strength. The pain of feeling small in a foreign language slowly turned into power, not loud power, but steady power. The kind that says, I am still here. I am still learning. And we are still choosing each other. Sometimes the climate outside is cold. Sometimes the climate inside a relationship feels tense. But when two people choose to speak, slowly, honestly, imperfectly, even winter begins to soften. The day I spoke anyway. Courage rarely feels heroic. Most of the time, it feels uncomfortable and slightly embarrassing. The turning point did not happen on a big stage. It happened in a school hallway. There was a parent-to-teacher meeting scheduled for our child. Normally, my husband handled most official conversations because his English felt faster, smoother. That day, he was traveling for work. I had two options, reschedule or go alone. My first instinct was to postpone. My second instinct, quieter but stronger, said, go. So I went. I prepared the way I had learned through hard seasons. I wrote simple sentences in a notebook. I want to know how my child is doing academically. Is there anything we should improve at home? Thank you for your support. Nothing impressive. Just clear. When I walked into the classroom, the teacher smiled warmly. Hi. Thanks for coming. My heart was beating fast, but I remembered something important. Fluency is not speed. Fluency is flow. I sat down. I breathed slowly. Slower breathing signals safety to the nervous system. When your breathing slows, your heart rate decreases. When your heart rate decreases, your thinking improves. Biology can work for you, not against you. The teacher began explaining test results and classroom behavior. She spoke at a natural pace. I understood most of it. Not every word, but enough. Instead of pretending to understand everything, I used a sentence I had practiced many times. Could you please say that again, a little slower? She did. Without hesitation. That moment changed something fundamental inside me. No one laughed. No one judged. No one sighed impatiently. In fact, she appreciated that I wanted clarity. There is a powerful communication principle in American culture, self-advocacy. Asking for clarification is not weakness. It shows engagement. It shows responsibility. Back home, I sometimes feared that asking someone to repeat meant I was slow. Here, it meant I cared. So I leaned into it. I understand that reading is strong, but math needs more practice. Is that correct? I repeated her message in my own words. That is called active listening. It confirms understanding and strengthens memory. Language teachers recommend this technique because it forces your brain to process meaning, not just sound. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. At the end, she said, "You're doing great." She meant as a parent. But I heard something deeper. You're doing great. Walking back to my car, sunlight brighter than in winter months, I realized I had just done something important. I had participated fully in a conversation that mattered. Not perfectly. Not elegantly. But fully. That day I understood a simple truth. Progress is not measured by the absence of mistakes. It is measured by the presence of participation. When learners wait to speak until they feel ready, they often wait too long. Readiness grows through action, not before it. Behavioral science calls this exposure therapy. The more you expose yourself to the thing you fear, in small, controlled steps, the less power it has over you. That meeting was exposure. Controlled. Prepared. Real. After that day, I raised the difficulty slightly. At the grocery store, instead of short answers, I added one sentence. Yes, plastic please. It's very cold today. At the playground, I initiated small talk with another parent. Your daughter is very friendly. How old is she? Short exchanges. Repeated often. Repetition builds neural efficiency. The brain creates stronger connections with frequent use. Think of it like a path in the snow. The first step leaves a faint mark. The 10th step creates a clear trail. Speaking anyway created trails in my mind. There was still fear. But fear was no longer in control. At home that evening, I told my husband about the meeting, in English. Slowly. Clearly. Without switching languages halfway. He listened and said, "You sound different." Different how? More confident. Confidence had not arrived like fireworks. It arrived like sunrise, gradual, quiet, undeniable. That night, I wrote in my journal. Today I spoke anyway. Not because I was fearless. Not because my grammar was perfect, but because I was tired of shrinking. And something else happened too. I began to enjoy speaking. Not every conversation. Not every situation. But enough to feel possibility. When language stops being a test and starts being a tool, your relationship with it changes. English was no longer the enemy. It was the bridge. And crossing that bridge, one careful step at a time, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that I thought I had lost in translation. Learning through stories. Textbooks teach structure. Stories teach life. After the school meeting, something inside me relaxed. I no longer saw English as a mountain to climb. I began to see it as a story to tell. And the simplest story I had was my own. Instead of memorizing random vocabulary lists, I started narrating my daily life in slow, simple English. While washing dishes, I would say quietly, "The water is warm. The plate is heavy. I feel tired but calm." While walking outside, I described the sky, the wind, the smell of grass. Simple present tense. Real context. Emotional connection. There is strong research supporting this method. When language is connected to personal meaning, the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, stores it more effectively. Emotion acts like glue for memory. So I stopped studying English as a subject. I started living it as a narration. One afternoon in early spring, the snow finally melted. Small green leaves appeared on trees. I stood outside and whispered, "Winter is over. Spring is coming." The sentence was basic, but it carried months of emotion. That became my theme. Winter is over. Not just the season. The emotional winter too. I began recording short voice journals. 2 minutes each day. No script. Just speaking slowly about what happened. Today I went to the bank. I felt nervous at first. But the conversation was clear. Then I listened back. Instead of criticizing, I observed. Where did I pause? Where did I hesitate? Which words felt natural? This practice built something powerful, self-feedback. Language experts often talk about input, listening and reading. But output with reflection accelerates growth. When you hear your own voice, your brain adjusts automatically. It felt strange at first. Listening to my accent. Hearing small grammar mistakes. But I reminded myself, clarity over perfection. Stories also helped my family. At dinner, we created a small tradition. Each person shared one short story from their day in English. Even our child participated. My friend lost his pencil. I scored a goal in gym class. Short narratives. Real emotion. Storytelling activates multiple parts of the brain, language centers, sensory areas, emotional circuits. It creates deeper encoding than isolated sentences. And something magical happened. English became associated with warmth. Not stress. Not embarrassment. Not bureaucracy. Warmth. I started reading simple short stories online, especially immigrant stories in America. Different climates. Different cultural adjustments. Different love stories. I realized my experience was not isolated. Belonging grows when you see yourself in others. I also began rewriting my own past in English. My first winter was hard. I felt alone. But I did not give up. Rewriting your story changes your relationship with it. Psychologists call this narrative reframing. When you describe painful events with growth language, the brain reorganizes memory with meaning instead of just fear. Pain becomes chapter 1, not the whole book. I even noticed physical changes. When speaking English about positive moments, my posture improved. My voice steadied. Emotion influences physiology. Language was no longer something happening to me. It was something I was shaping. One evening, sitting on the porch as the air turned warmer, I told my husband, I think English is becoming part of me. Not replacing my first language. Not erasing my roots. Adding to them. He smiled and said, "You sound at home." Home. That word used to feel divided. One country in memory. One country in reality. Now, through stories, the distance felt smaller. The climate differences still existed. American policies were still structured. Cultural nuances still required attention. But I was no longer reacting. I was narrating. And narration creates power. When you tell your story slowly, clearly, honestly, you take ownership of it. That is why this method works so well for listening, reading, and speaking practice. Because it is not artificial. It is alive. Your life is already full of vocabulary. Your challenges are already full of verbs. Your emotions are already full of adjectives. All you have to do is speak them. And somewhere between the snow is cold and spring is coming, I realized something gentle but profound. Healing was happening. Not loudly. But sentence by sentence. Raising children between cultures. Nothing exposes your language gaps faster than your own child asking a question you cannot immediately answer. One afternoon, my child came home from school and asked, "Why do we celebrate Thanksgiving here but not in your country?" Simple question. Big answer. I paused, not because I didn't understand the words, but because I wanted to respond clearly in English, not switch back to my first language. This holiday is part of American history, I began slowly. Every country has different traditions. We respect both. Respect both. That became our family philosophy. Raising children between cultures is like standing on two bridges at the same time. One side holds memory, grandparents, native language, familiar food. The other side holds school events, American slang, local policies, new opportunities. And language sits in the middle. In the United States, children are encouraged to ask questions openly. They are taught to express opinions in class. Share your thoughts. Explain your reasoning. This educational culture values verbal confidence. At home, I sometimes hesitated. In my upbringing, children showed respect through listening more than speaking. So I had to adapt, not only my English, but my mindset. Research in bilingual development shows that children raised with two languages often develop stronger cognitive flexibility. Their brains switch between systems, improving executive function. But this benefit depends on consistent exposure. That meant I had a choice. Hide behind insecurity, or model courage. When school emails arrived, I read them carefully. Instead of asking my husband to summarize, I tried to interpret them myself first. PTA meetings. Policy updates. Holiday schedules. Each document became practice. One time, I volunteered to help at a school event. I almost withdrew at the last minute, afraid of fast conversations with other parents. But I reminded myself, participation builds belonging. During the event, another parent asked where I was from. We talked about cultural traditions. She said, "Your accent is beautiful." I almost laughed from surprise. For months, I had seen my accent as a flaw. That moment reframed it as identity. Children notice how you react to yourself. If I apologized constantly for my English, my child might associate bilingualism with shame. If I spoke confidently, even imperfectly, bilingualism became strength. So I started saying sentences proudly at home. We speak two languages in this family. It's okay to mix sometimes. Making mistakes is part of learning. These statements were not only for my child. They were for me. Family dinners changed too. We sometimes switched languages mid-sentence. It felt messy but alive. I realized something important. Language purity is less important than connection. American culture values individuality. My culture values collective identity. Raising children here required blending both. We encouraged independence, but also emphasized family closeness. We attended American holidays and maintained our traditional ones. Pumpkin pie and familiar dishes on the same table. The more I explained our traditions in English, the stronger my vocabulary became around culture, values, and history. This is how we celebrate. This dish represents gratitude. In our culture, family gatherings are very important. Describing identity deepened my fluency. There were still challenging moments. Once, my child corrected my pronunciation of a word learned at school. For a second, I felt embarrassed. Then I smiled. "Thank you for teaching me," I said. Humility keeps language growth alive. Psychologists describe modeling behavior as one of the strongest forms of teaching. When children see adults learning openly, they develop resilience. They learn that growth continues at any age. Over time, I noticed something subtle but powerful. Parent-teacher meetings felt natural. School forms felt manageable. Casual conversations at playgrounds felt lighter. The space between cultures stopped feeling like a gap. It started feeling like expansion. My child once said, "I like that we are different." Different. Not less. Not behind. Different. And in that word, I found quiet pride. Raising children between cultures forced me to step forward linguistically. I could no longer stay silent. I had to speak, for them, for us. English was no longer just my challenge. It became part of our shared story. And through bedtime stories, school emails, and holiday explanations, I realized something steady. Healing was not only personal. It was generational. Pain into practice. Pain is a strange teacher. It does not ask permission. It does not arrive gently. But if you pay attention, it leaves instructions. By the second year in America, something had shifted inside me. The climate still changed with dramatic seasons. Policies were still detailed and sometimes overwhelming. Cultural differences still required awareness. But I was no longer reacting emotionally to every difficulty. I was studying it. There is a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Repetition strengthens pathways. Emotion strengthens them faster. That means the hard moments I once wanted to avoid were actually powerful training opportunities. When I felt embarrassed speaking English, instead of saying, "This is terrible," I began asking, what exactly was difficult? Was it vocabulary? Was it speed? Was it fear of judgment? Clarity reduces emotional intensity. I noticed patterns. Fast speech overwhelmed me. So I practiced listening to podcasts at slower speeds first. Many platforms allow 0.75x speed. When comprehension improved, I increased to normal speed. Gradual exposure builds tolerance. Abstract vocabulary confused me. So I focused on high-frequency phrases used in daily life. I'm looking for, could you clarify, let me think about that. These phrases act like anchors in conversation. Perfectionism paralyzed me. So I set a rule, speak at 70% confidence, not 100%. Waiting for total certainty meant never speaking. Behavioral science calls this imperfect action. Progress accelerates when action precedes confidence, not the other way around. I also structured my practice differently. Instead of random study sessions, I created a 3-part routine. First, listening for understanding. Short audio. Clear speaker. No multitasking. Just focus. Second, reading aloud slowly. Not silently. Speaking activates motor memory. When you read aloud, your brain connects visual input with muscle movement. That strengthens retention. Third, personal adaptation. I rewrote what I heard into my own story. If the audio said, "She moved to a new city and felt lonely," I would say, "I moved to a new country and felt lonely." Small changes. Personal meaning. This method transformed passive learning into active integration. And something fascinating happened. The emotional weight of my early struggles began to feel lighter, not because they disappeared, but because they had purpose. Psychologists describe post-traumatic growth as positive psychological change following adversity. It does not mean the pain was good. It means meaning was created from it. My early winters of doubt became evidence of resilience. My paperwork panic became advanced reading practice. My marriage tension became communication training. When pain becomes structured practice, it loses chaos. One afternoon, sitting at a cafe with a notebook, I reflected on a sentence I once whispered through tears: maybe I am not meant to live here. Now, I wrote a different sentence. I am building a life here. Different verbs. Different identity. Language shapes self-concept. When you repeatedly describe yourself as incapable, your brain internalizes it. When you describe yourself as learning, adapting, building, your identity shifts. Cognitive psychology supports this. Self-talk influences neural patterns and behavior. The words you use about yourself matter. So I practiced deliberate self-language. Instead of, my English is bad, I said, my English is improving. Instead of, I always make mistakes, I said, mistakes show where I can grow. This is not empty positivity. It is cognitive training. The brain believes repeated narratives. Pain also taught me patience. Language acquisition is not linear. Some weeks felt like rapid improvement. Other weeks felt stagnant. But growth was happening under the surface. Like winter soil preparing for spring. There is research showing that sleep consolidates language learning. Even when you feel stuck, your brain processes new vocabulary overnight. That knowledge comforted me. Rest was not laziness. It was integration. Gradually, English stopped feeling like a foreign layer placed on top of me. It began to feel like a tool inside me. And when I looked back at the version of myself trembling at a grocery store cashier, I did not feel shame anymore. I felt compassion. That earlier version was not weak. She was adapting. Pain had not destroyed her. It had trained her. And somewhere between fear and repetition, something powerful formed. Resilience with an accent. The quiet confidence. Confidence did not arrive with applause. It came quietly. One morning, I answered a phone call from a service provider. The representative spoke quickly, using terms I once would not have understood. I asked her to repeat one sentence. I clarified one detail. I confirmed the appointment. And when the call ended, I realized something simple. I was not shaking. That small moment meant more than any certificate. Confidence is not loud. It is stable. In psychology, confidence is often described as self-efficacy, the belief that you can handle situations effectively. It grows from mastery experiences. Not theory. Not motivation videos. Real experiences. Each time I completed a difficult conversation, my brain recorded evidence. You survived. You adapted. You figured it out. Evidence builds belief. Belief builds action. Action builds identity. There was a time when I avoided conversations in public spaces. If my husband was beside me, I let him speak. It felt safer. But safety was slowing my growth. So we made a quiet agreement. In public interactions, I would speak first, even if my sentences were imperfect, even if my pronunciation carried hesitation, even if silence followed while I searched for a word. Those pauses used to feel like failure. Now I see them differently. Pauses are processing time. Native speakers pause too. They just do it with less self-judgment. I stopped apologizing before every sentence. Instead of saying, "Sorry, my English is not good," I simply spoke. Most people were patient. Some were even kind. A few were impatient. But none of those reactions defined my worth. Another shift happened internally. Earlier in my journey, every mistake felt personal. If someone asked me to repeat myself, I assumed I had failed. But communication is shared responsibility. Listening requires effort too. When I stopped carrying all the blame, conversations felt lighter. There is a concept called cognitive reframing. It means changing the way you interpret events. The event stays the same. The meaning changes. Before reframing, they didn't understand me. I'm terrible at English. After reframing, they didn't understand. Let me try another way. Same situation. Different power. I also began noticing something unexpected. My accent, once a source of insecurity, became part of my identity. People sometimes asked, "Where are you from?" Not with judgment, with curiosity. Instead of shrinking, I answered confidently. My story became an asset, not a weakness. Accents tell stories of courage. They reveal that someone stepped outside familiarity and learned to function in another linguistic system. That is not deficiency. That is expansion. Gradually, English stopped feeling like a test I had to pass. It became a bridge. I could connect with neighbors. I could understand news. I could express frustration. I could express gratitude. I could express love. Language is more than grammar. It is access. Access to opportunity. Access to community. Access to self-expression. One evening, after a long day, I caught myself thinking in English while cooking. Not full sentences. Just fragments. Need more salt. Turn off the stove. Call tomorrow. That moment felt symbolic. A second language was no longer external effort. It was integrating into my inner voice. Identity expansion happens quietly. One repeated action at a time. Looking back, the early loneliness was real. The doubt was real. The exhaustion was real. But so was the transformation. And here is something important. You do not become a different person when you learn a new language. You become a larger version of yourself. With more ways to think. More ways to explain. More ways to survive. Confidence, I learned, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to speak anyway. And somewhere between mispronounced words and brave attempts, I discovered something powerful. My voice works. When pain became power. There was a season when I thought the struggle would break me. Loneliness in a new country. Misunderstood sentences. Cultural gaps inside my own home. At times, it felt like I was losing pieces of myself. But something unexpected was happening beneath the surface. Growth is rarely dramatic while it is happening. It feels slow, repetitive, ordinary. Neuroscience tells us that when we repeat small actions consistently, our brain builds stronger neural pathways. What feels awkward today becomes automatic tomorrow. That is why slow practice works. When I practiced simple English sentences every day, even just 10 minutes, my brain was quietly adapting. When I forced myself to speak in small situations, ordering coffee, asking a question, answering the phone, I was training resilience. Not just language. Resilience is built the same way muscles are built. Stress. Recovery. Repeat. Pain, when processed instead of avoided, becomes instruction. I used to think emotional difficulty meant I was failing. Now I see it differently. Emotional discomfort often signals expansion. You are stepping beyond what feels familiar. Living in America taught me something deeper than vocabulary. It taught me flexibility. Weather changes across regions. Communication styles vary by culture. Policies, paperwork, social expectations, they all require adaptation. At first, adaptation felt exhausting. Later, it became a skill. Adaptability is power. The more flexible you become, the less fragile you feel. One spring morning, I walked outside and noticed the air felt softer. Winter had ended. Trees were blooming again. I realized something symbolic in that moment. Seasons change whether we feel ready or not. So do we. The version of me who arrived here was afraid to speak. Afraid to misunderstand. Afraid to be judged. The version of me now still makes mistakes. But she does not hide. She asks questions. She clarifies. She continues. That difference matters. Language learning is not only about pronunciation or grammar accuracy. It is about identity reconstruction. When you learn a second language, you are not erasing who you were. You are expanding the structure of who you can be. Research shows bilingual individuals often develop stronger cognitive flexibility and emotional regulation. Navigating between two systems trains the brain to tolerate ambiguity, to switch perspectives, to hold multiple meanings at once. In other words, learning English did not just help me communicate. It strengthened my mind. There were days I wanted immediate results. Fluency. Confidence. Ease. Instead, I received something slower but more durable. Stability. Stability built from repetition. Stability built from surviving discomfort. Stability built from showing up when quitting felt easier. And here is the truth I wish someone had told me earlier. The goal is not perfect English. The goal is sustainable courage. When you speak imperfectly but honestly, you grow. When you continue despite embarrassment, you grow. When you practice even when no one sees your effort, you grow. Growth is invisible before it becomes visible. Maybe you are in your own winter right now. Maybe English feels heavy. Maybe adapting to a new culture feels overwhelming. That does not mean you are weak. It means you are stretching. And stretching is uncomfortable. But one day, you will notice something small, a conversation handled calmly, a sentence spoken naturally, a thought formed without translation. And you will realize. The pain did not defeat you. It trained you. This story is not about perfection. It is about persistence. Not about sounding like a native speaker. But about sounding like yourself, clearly, bravely, consistently. So here is a quiet question to carry with you, if the struggle is shaping you, not stopping you. What kind of strength is being built inside you right now? Your journey is still unfolding. And the next chapter might surprise you. There was a version of me who almost quit. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, slowly, internally. I almost accepted a smaller life. A life where I let others speak for me. A life where I avoided conversations. A life where I confused silence with safety. But silence was shrinking me. And one day, I realized something uncomfortable. If I stayed quiet, nothing would break. But nothing would grow either. That realization changed everything. Growth rarely feels heroic. It feels inconvenient. It asks you to repeat simple sentences when you are tired. It asks you to try again after awkward moments. It asks you to look foolish long enough to become fluent. Fluency is built on embarrassment survived. Think about that. Every confident speaker you admire once struggled. Every smooth conversation once had pauses. Every strong voice was once uncertain. The difference is not talent. The difference is continuation. When I look back at my first months in America, the cold air, the unfamiliar culture, the fear of misunderstanding, I no longer feel shame. I feel gratitude. Because those moments forced me to grow roots. Not shallow roots that depend on comfort. Deep roots that survive seasons. And here is what I know now. You do not need perfect grammar to have dignity. You do not need a native accent to have value. You do not need approval to have a voice. Your voice is not waiting for perfection. It is waiting for permission. And only you can give it that. Maybe today your English feels slow. Maybe your sentences feel simple. Maybe you still translate in your head. That is okay. Simple is not weak. Simple is clear. Simple is strong. Simple is sustainable. The real transformation is not that I learned English. The real transformation is that I stopped hiding. And when you stop hiding, something powerful happens. You begin to live fully, not just correctly. So as this story closes, I want you to imagine something. A year from now, you look back at this moment. You remember the hesitation. You remember the doubt. And you smile. Because you did not quit. Because you practiced. Because you spoke. Because you continued. Your future confidence is being built by today's small effort. And maybe the most beautiful part of this journey is this. The voice you almost gave up on is becoming the voice that carries you forward. If this story felt familiar, if even one sentence sounded like your own thoughts, then your journey is already moving. And the next chapter? It begins the moment you decide to speak again.